We are live now.
Hi everybody, welcome to Addison's Corner, Bikes Not Bombs. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about adjusting your gears, and hopefully I can help you make it a little bit easier. First I want to tell you a little bit about Bikes Not Bombs. Bikes Not Bombs uses the bicycle as a vehicle for social change to achieve economic mobility for Black and other marginalized people in Boston and the greater global South. B&B provides free education to empower people to have a greater appreciation of mechanics and bicycle arts and giving back to our communities. We're going to go through some helpful tips, talk about some accessories and some processes to make this easy for you, and after all that we're going to do a bit of a Q&A. So if you guys have any questions, we want you to feel free to put those in the comments. Hopefully I can cover everything for you. Anyways, let's get started with the tools that you'll need. Screwdriver. If you have more than one size, that helps a lot because there are some smaller screws on these things that a smaller screwdriver is necessary. This is a number 2. We call this a number 1. They are nice to have. Not everybody, I understand, has all of this. So a couple screwdrivers and a couple Allen wrenches is really all you need. Maybe even a set of pliers, but we're not too worried about those right now. That's for if things get crazy. Anyways, you have your front derailleur and your rear derailleur. In order to keep these derailleurs in place, they rely on a few things. First off, we need to make sure that the bolt that mounts the derailleur to the bike is tight on your front right there. And then we have your rear mount right here. It's important to make sure that you can't take any of these things by hand and move them around. They need to be in there really sturdy, otherwise the gears are not going to associate with the amount of clicks on the gear shifter. Anyways, I started with the chain off of the bike just to let you know that how easy it is to adjust some of this stuff. I like to leave the chain off the bike initially for my setup of my gears so I can set our what we call our limit screws, which are located right here and right here. And on the back, they're right here and here. And a lot of people wonder what those are. 9 out of 10 times they're going to be labeled with H and L. That means high and low. And that refers to your low gear being your gear all the way up here. That screw only allows this guy to travel as far as this low gear, assuming it's adjusted correctly. The H screw is associated with your high gear, which is your smallest ring. And this goes for the front derailleur as well. This screw only allows the derailleur to travel as far as either the high or the low rings, assuming they are adjusted properly. If they are not adjusted properly, you run the risk of getting your chain caught somewhere and tangling up your gears and breaking a few of your components, which we see unfortunately more often than not from improperly adjusted derailleurs. So the reason I have the chain out of here is because it allows me to easily see where the derailleur goes on the in association with the cogs. So I set my low limit screw with my screwdriver, Phillips head, by taking it all the way over to the low gear, and I look at it from the back. And it's important to look at gears from the back when you're adjusting them because you want to make sure the goal ultimately is to have in every single gear this cog right here called your jockey pulley. It's your upper jockey pulley. This cog needs to align with this cog right here. It needs to align with every single cog it's in perfectly, or we need to make an adjustment. That adjustment is going to be either with cable tension or with these limit screws right here. So a lot of people get really confused and they just start turning screws all over the place thinking that something's going to make a difference. Unfortunately, it can make a big difference fast with the littlest tweak. So hopefully we can help you understand just a little bit about troubleshooting this, because it's actually very simple stuff and there's only a few rules you need to follow. And if you follow those rules, then hopefully we won't end up in too much trouble. Anyways, I'm sure you guys are going to be adjusting your derailleurs with the chains on, so I'll throw this one back on. Cool thing about derailleurs these days is that on your shifting mechanisms, you generally have an area where you can adjust the derailleurs. For your front shifter, you have this guy right here. This is your front shifter's barrel adjuster. We'll get this out of the way. That guy right there with a twist either clockwise or counterclockwise, you can make a big difference in your shifting, and I'll show you how to make that easy. For your rear derailleur, we have an adjuster right here. And again, this can be very simple to adjust, and it helps you be able to adjust it on the fly. A couple issues you might notice that might indicate that it's time to adjust a derailleur are obviously weird noises, tickings, constant clickings when you pedal and you shift and it's just not shifting into gear, obviously. Chattering when you're pedaling. All sorts of those little things are easy to adjust with a few tweaks, and if you know how to do it, it can be very quick. So we'll start with the front derailleur. I like to start by doing everything with all the cable tension out. That way I can make a few adjustments that I know don't rely on cable tension, and therefore I can knock those off my checklist of what I need to do to troubleshoot my issues. So right now, let's just say that my chain keeps falling off to the inside, just like that. So what I like to do, in order to prevent that, we need to make sure that when we're in the lowest gear in the back, which is the furthest the chain can travel inward, we need to make sure that we've got a minimal amount of space between our derailleur and our chain. But the last thing we want is for it to rub. So right now I'm going to drop all the tension out of my cable so I can make that adjustment. That way I know that cable tension isn't interfering with me making these adjustments. Because otherwise you might get stuck and have to readjust a whole bunch of things. So when we drop the cable tension out, I want to make sure that I am just at the right distance. And would you mind getting the camera around so we can show exactly where the cable tension comes out? Sorry. Ooh, and I just cut you off right there, didn't I? So right here is where the cable comes out of. It holds on right here, and this is your average hybrid bike, so hopefully you guys have something very similar at home. I would imagine you do. This is a hybrid with a triple crankset, so all I did to take this cable tension out was loosen this with a 5mm Allen wrench. And once I loosened it, it came right out. You never want to take it all the way off. You don't want to loosen this all the way. You want to make sure that this part stays here, because if it falls off, it's a real pain to get that back on. Anyways, I have my cable tension dropped out. Now I'm ready to set my low limit because I'm in the smallest ring, which is my lowest gear. And the way I set that is I make sure that, I'll show you what it looks like when it's not set well. Let's unscrew this all the way, or as far as we can. If I were to do this, there's a good chance that if this low limit is screwed too loose, that the chain will fall right off when it comes back down from the other gears. Or at least it runs a greater risk. So we like it to be just as close to the chain as we can get it without it rubbing. So I take my low limit screw, and you can see it move. I'm looking for about 1 millimeter's worth of distance from the chain to the derailleur, and then I'm going to give it a rotation to make sure that it's not rubbing. So we don't hear any noise. We've got about 1 millimeter of space here, so we don't wear down the derailleur with the chain, and the chain doesn't rub. Now that I know I've got that right, I'm going to put my cable tension back in. So I pull it as tight as I can with my hand. I sit it right back in the cradle and tighten it down. Now I'm going to use my barrel adjuster to make sure I can get up to the next gear. So at this point I'm going to get into gear 2 and I'm going to start setting that, since I know that gear 1 is pretty well dialed. So I'm going to push it up into the second gear, and my goal here is to make sure that I'm not rubbing on this gear or this gear, my high gear or my low gear. So right now I'm hearing a little bit of rubbing, and I'm going to show you how to adjust it. But I want to go over here and see if I have any rubbing. I'm not hearing any. I'm getting some noise back here, but we're going to adjust that after. I like to do the front derailleur first. It's got less gears, so it's a little bit easier. I'm not getting rubbing up here, but I need to eliminate this rubbing over here. Now, the limit screws only allow adjustments to be made in the high and low gears. So, in order to make any adjustments in the middle gear, all I need to use is this little guy right here. And I need to loosen it. I need to loosen this cable so I can stop that rubbing. So in order to decrease cable tension just a little bit, I'm going to rotate this counterclockwise. And I can actually see my derailleur move when I do that. And I don't have any rubbing right there. So I've eliminated the rubbing here. Let's see if when I shift back into this gear over here, the highest gear, I have any rubbing. If I do have any rubbing, I'll just need to increase the cable tension a little bit. We got a little bit of noise. We do have a little bit of rubbing, so I'm just going to rotate this clockwise and tighten up the cable a little bit. And I like to shift back down and then go back up to see if I fixed it. I think it sounds pretty good. If you get a little rubbing here and there, it's okay. But our goal is with the cable tension, with this little dial right here, we're trying to eliminate any rub we have in any of the gears in our middle ring. That's if you have 3 gears on the front. If you have 2 gears in the front, that's not something you really need to worry about. The limit screws and having your cable tight enough will get that job done. But here you really need to fine tune it, but it's easy to do thanks to this guy right here. And it only needs a rotation, about a half rotation or maybe 1 full rotation to make the difference you need. So now we're going to try and shift right up to the 3rd gear. I can drop it back down and I know the chain doesn't fall off. I can shift it up and I know the chain doesn't rub. Now I want to make sure I can shift up to the 3rd gear and not fall off. I also need to make sure it doesn't rub when it gets all the way to the highest gear on the outside of this derailleur cage. So I'm going to drop it all the way down to the 8th gear. And we're having some troubles in the back, but at this point I can't hear any rubbing. Here. Whoop! We're just going to quiet this guy down real quick. So I don't hear any rubbing, but what I noticed is that this chain does have the potential to travel further, because when I push on my shifter all the way, I can make this derailleur move. With a quick tighten of the H screw, which associates with my highest gear, I can tighten this down just to where I feel it stop. And when I push my shifter, well, there it goes. We gotta go a little further. Just to where you can feel it stop. Now when I push my shifter, it doesn't do anything because the limit is stopping me from traveling any further. This can prevent your chain from falling off. So fortunately this bike has a nice little chain guard, so if the chain did travel farther, it wouldn't fall off. But if I didn't have that high screw adjusted properly on another bike, and I just kept on shifting, it could potentially drop the chain right off. So here we go. Now we can travel through these gears. And again, we're getting all sorts of troubles back there. And I'm getting a little bit of, chatter when I go all the way down to the lowest gear. So I'm going to take this low screw and back it off about 1/4 of a turn so the derailleur is able to just travel a little bit further. Let's see if that made a difference. Hopefully it'll shift just a bit faster. Our goal with any shift ultimately is to make sure that it shifts within half of a crank's rotation. So we're just about there. I think we like that. So we're just cycling through the gears now, making sure we're not getting any rubbing and making sure it's not falling off. I like to even try it kind of fast Ooh, there we go. And we're looking good. Now we're going to go to the back derailleur. So to recap the front derailleurs, your low screw associates with this smallest ring right here, and it only allows the chain, if it's adjusted properly, to travel as far as this and not any further. That's what prevents your chain from falling off to the inside if it's properly adjusted. Your high screw is associated with your biggest ring on the outside. It's gear 3 or gear 2, and it only allows your chain to travel this far. Your cable tension is what the derailleur depends on to be able to climb up to your 3rd gear, and you can adjust that with this little guy right up at the shifter really easily on the fly, but it takes practice. And remember, little adjustments go a long way. So let's get into the rear derailleur. I could already hear this guy giving me trouble. And that's kind of a big thing about derailleurs, is that they're going to tell you, they're pretty vocal. So they're going to tell you when there's problems. You're going to know pretty quick. So sometimes you can even make those adjustments with your eyes closed, because a derailleur should be silent when it's running properly. So I want you to look right here. My goal with a derailleur is to make sure that everything is hanging perfectly straight down in a perfectly straight line from your gear all the way down. We've got a couple components here that are going to allow that to happen. We need to make sure that this cage is straight. We also need to make sure that this derailleur hanger is straight. This derailleur hanger is a little bit bent to the inside, just to the left a little bit. And that's going to prevent us from being able to shift smoothly in either 1 or 2 of these gears. A lot of times people try to adjust gears until their face turns blue, but it just happens to be that little guy that needs the adjustment. So I'm going to straighten that out real quick. There is a tool to do this, but because you may have to do this on the road, basically what's happening is when we pedal, we get a whole bunch of noise. Let me show you by putting the cable tension back in and shifting up to one of the gears. Now ideally this would be enough to make this thing shift smoothly, but since we have a bent derailleur hanger, which can happen very, very easily, and it's something we see very common, when you have a bent derailleur hanger, it allows it just makes it not run so smoothly in one gear and usually pretty good in the other ones. Hear those noises? We don't want those noises. Now it's jumping, and this all has to do with it being bent. So in order to fix that, we want to make sure that basically it's just perfectly straight down. Something you can do on the fly if you have to. There is a tool to do this, and we would suggest you bring it into a shop and put what we call a derailleur alignment gauge on it. But since this can cause you so much trouble just on the pedal home, and you might need to remedy it real quick, sometimes you can take your 5mm Allen wrench, put your hand right to the inside of it, and while I'm turning the Allen wrench, I'm also rotating my hand just the slightest amount and straightening that out. I've had a bit of training on this, so it's easier for me to do maybe than some, but the idea is that this piece is very delicate because back in the day, this was not separated from the bike, and when it would bend, that would be the end of the bicycle's frame, and we'd have to replace the entire bike. Nowadays, we can just replace this little piece because we depend on it breaking. This piece costs about $15 to $30 nowadays instead of having to replace your bike. So derailleur hangers commonly bend, and it can happen very, very easily just from leaning a bike down on something. But it's quick to adjust, but it can cause you a lot of trouble. Anyways, we've got that straightened out. And I've got my cable back in there. We've got some skipping. So now derailleurs do all sorts of different things. Right now I'm seeing that it's jumping in one particular area which must be my quick link not popped back into place. There we go. Oh, what do we got? A stiff link? So actually, this is you know, part of what we do. If you notice right back here, I'm seeing that when I pedal this around, something's jumping. So we're gonna catch it right when it happens. There we go. Where is it? What do we got? Right here. Maybe a link is not moving, something is bent. Either way, when that happens, we feel every link. And it looks like this quick link is just not popped into place. Okay. Cool. So in that case, it was the quick link. This guy right here, which keeps the chain together, because I took it off, it wasn't settled back into place. Anyways, now we're going to check our high limit screw on the back. This basically has the same principles, relies on the same principles as the front derailleur. Your high limit screw, your low limit screw, and your cable tension. I already released the cable tension, so now I'm going to check and make sure my high limit screw is lined up. Could definitely do a better job on this. So right now, I can tell that my high limit screw is pretty well lined up, so I'm going to take it out of whack so you guys at home can see what the goal is. So if you get the camera right on that, if you notice, this is going to cause you all sorts of shifting issues. Your chain's going to bounce around. If you notice, this cog is just to the right side of this gear, and we want those gears to be pretty darn well lined up, about as well as we can. So this is your high gear, so it associates with your high screw. We're going to tighten that to bring it right in to perfectly align it with that gear. Keep it from making any noise. Now, we're going to check how our cable tension is. Now, after I adjust my high limit screw, since I have my cable in the derailleur, I'm going to start going through the gears. And the minute I find trouble, I'm going to show you how to adjust it. So right now, we're going to go up into the second ring. Right now, it sounds pretty good, but I just tried shifting upward, and it didn't shift at all, which means that I have too much slack in my cable. So for starters, I'm going to take my 5mm Allen wrench, loosen up the cable straddle area, pull it tight with my hand, just hand tight. I'm not yanking on this thing, I'm just holding it stable, but I took all the slack out of it, and then I'm going to tighten it back down. Now it's actually not even a bad idea, we'll take the cable tension out, to give yourself a little bit of room to work with on your barrel adjuster so you can turn it either way, so you can make your adjustments after all your cable tension is in there, so we don't have to drop it back out again. So I'm pulling it tight, locking it down, and we're going to start our climb again. And we can do this over and over and over again until everything just sounds just right, and we get those gear changes within a half a pedal's rotation, half a crankset rotation. Oh, now it's jumping too far. You saw that? Going a little too far, so that means that I have too much cable tension. So I'm going to take this guy and turn it clockwise to loosen my cable just a little bit until it stops making noise. And then I'm going to shift back down again and see what happens when I shift up. Now it's not jumping any further. Let's see what happens when we get into the next gear. Making a little bit of noise. Make a little adjustment there. There's that little bit of noise, so I'm going to get behind it and see how well lined up it is. So it actually looks like this guy is traveling a little bit further, so I'm going to loosen the cable tension up just a little bit more and see what happens. And I'm going to go back down, and we'll go back up, and we'll start the climb again. Everything's sounding pretty darn good right now. But when I just tried shifting up to the final gear, gear 1, I couldn't get there. I didn't get a full click. And the reason I didn't get that full click was because my low limit screw was too tight. So, grab my screwdriver. I'm going to loosen up my L screw because this is the only gear that your low limit screw is associated with. These screws don't do anything for you if you are not in either this gear or this gear. So a lot of people will find that they're shifting wrong. You know, their shifting's not going so great when they're in one of these gears, and try to use these screws and it won't do you any good. Anyways, we're going to loosen this one up just a little bit and see if I can get that full click out of the gears. And there we go. Now I'm going to go back all the way down and see how it goes again. And that sounded really good. I really don't like I'm not getting that full click still, so I am going to loosen up that low screw a little bit more, and there we go. That's a satisfying click right there. So the idea when you're trying to troubleshoot your gears, you know, you might just start fiddling with it right away, but what you really need to do is get off the bike and take a look at which gear is giving you trouble. It could be one in the middle, which would indicate that perhaps your cable is just a little too loose or a little too tight. At any rate, you can adjust that just by eyeballing it right from the back and turning this guy left or right, bringing it from either side. If I turn this guy, a fun little technique is if I turn this barrel adjuster this way, then this derailleur is going to travel that way. If I turn this barrel adjuster this way, it's going to travel this way. And our goal is always to line it up perfectly with whatever gear we're in. So your issue could be in one of these gears, or it could be all the way to the outside, and your chain could be falling off, in which case you're going to mess with either your limit screws, your high limit screw on this one, or your low limit screw on this one. But troubleshooting this stuff can be easy, and there's ultimately only a couple rules that you need to follow. You need to make sure that your limit screws are adjusted and your cable tension is dialed in. And hopefully I have helped you make that a little easier. Things to take care of your gears a little bit better. We always recommend that you wipe down your chain with some sort of degreaser. The company Pedro's makes some really great degreasers. You can just put on a t-shirt or an old rag and wipe along. And then just drip apply some lube to it. Keeping your chain clean can go a long way for keeping your gears clean because your chain drags all that dirt through everything and it collects on everything. And when it gets into your components, it can make them move sluggishly and or not at all. So it doesn't hurt to lubricate when you're lubricating your chain, the little pivot points you see on your your derailleurs, your gear changing mechanisms. You can lubricate these wheels right here just by dripping a little bit right there. That'll eliminate some squealing. And if your derailleur is moving rather slow, you can try lubricating right here and here in these pivot points, and also up here. Also, it doesn't hurt to get a little bit of lube on your your cables as well. Anyways, I think that about covers it for a quick breakdown of derailleurs on hybrid bikes. Obviously, there are some bikes that require a finer tune, but the idea is that they try to make these guys as intuitive as possible for you to be able to make a quick adjustment when necessary.
Okay.
And that's that.
See if we have any questions from the audience. We have 14 live viewers.
Hi, guys.
What if you don't have a bike stand at home to be able to?
It's pretty easy to do it upside down as well. And actually, a lot of the lessons I teach, I do end up just putting the bike upside down and showing it from that point of view. So it's that easy. Things will look a little backwards, obviously, but I understand that is sometimes how you got to do it, and it's no problem. Putting it upside down is easy.
We go through the entire process and it's just one gear that's acting up. there ever a case where it's not an adjustment of the derailleur?
Absolutely. If there's one gear that's acting up, that is a very good indication. Oftentimes when the derailleur needs adjustment, every gear is acting up, unless it's just in one of these far rings right here. If only one gear is acting up, that's a good indication that your derailleur hanger is bent, because it will only make one certain gear that it misaligns with act really peculiar. So a lot of people get stuck trying to make all sorts of adjustments to their derailleurs when it's really this piece that needs to be straightened out, and their derailleur never actually got misaligned or unadjusted. Oftentimes when we readjust this, the derailleur is already in fine shape and there was no issue there. It was just the bent derailleur hanger, which is something not everybody looks for, but the easy way to look for it is if you look at your bike, your chain and your gears, you want to make sure that there is as perfect a straight line all the way down from up here down to here as you can get. If you've got this guy leaning to the inside or the outside like that, that's an indication that something is bent, especially this derailleur hanger or sometimes even this lower cage.
I do have one question from the audience.
Yeah.
Actually, Jamil, who's a current or a former staff.
Oh, wonderful.
He's wondering about what if the cassette looks like a ninja star and looks like worn out, and how that will affect your shifting. Yeah.
So a lot of people, that's a great question, Jamil, thank you. A lot of people come in to the shop saying that their gears are skipping. And I ask them how they're skipping. And I ask them if what happens when they are riding is if they are going up a hill or if they're at a stop sign, they pedal and they feel it skip forward. The other kind of skipping you can get is just that chattering when you're trying to skip gears. But if it's the former, that first type of skipping indicates that your drivetrain, your chain, and your gears are worn out from being under the load, under the stress of you pedaling on that same chain for so long. Keeping your chain clean can certainly help prolong the life of your chain. But when your chain gets worn out, it will wear out the rest of your gears and not hold on to the gears, and when you pedal very hard, it can cause them to skip forward and be a very unpleasant experience. And to fix that, we change out your chain and your gears together.
One question from Scott. This is similar to what you just described, but how do you know the difference between just a skipping chain or if your derailleur really needs adjustment?
Well, if what is happening what I just said before, if you're at a stoplight and you find that you pedal really hard and you're skipping forward, that means it's time to replace components of your drivetrain, most likely your chain and your cassette. Any other kind of chattering or anything like that, more often than not, is an adjustment of the cable that goes back to your derailleur. So we're adjusting your cable tension at that point. If that doesn't fix it, then it is often an indication that this piece is bent right here. Sometimes the cable itself can even just come right out of the frame and cause everything to go awry. Once the cable's out of the frame, it won't do anything. That's certainly another situation that can happen, and it's very easy to fix. We just slide that right back in. And it can pop out up here. That's certainly something that can happen. It can create the illusion of an issue with your derailleur when really all that happened was your cable fell out of the housing or something like that. Also, there's plenty of times when people find that they're shifting and shifting and shifting and it gets progressively worse. That can be an indication that your cable itself is also fraying from the inside. I've seen a lot of cables fray from the inside right where they meet up with the shifter, especially on road bikes. And you don't know until it finally snaps and everything stops working altogether because you adjust it and it seems good, and then all of a sudden it doesn't work as well again, and then you adjust it again, it seems good, and it doesn't work again after that. That's often due to fraying cables that you can't see until you pull the whole cable out. So changing your cable Changing your housing. Your housing can also sometimes pull out of the inner casing. These are all things that can be factors of improper shifting.
One more from
Yeah.
Tess. Thanks for sharing this. What do you recommend if your gears are a little rusty? I think they're used to using bike lube, but maybe some other recommendations. I know that we talked about taking care of your drivetrain, and if it's dirty, that could lead to poor shifting performance too.
Absolutely. Rusty gears can often be remedied by using something like this. This is Pedro's wet lube. It's not too thick. Applying it to your chain. This stuff actually works really good to kind of break down rust as well. So if you have some rusty gears there, applying that to your chain helps a lot. But also what I like to do is apply lube to the points where the shifter cable travels through and meets out with the outside. Shifter cables don't often corrode when they're inside the cable housing, which is all this black stuff right here. So I like to drop lube just to the inside because shift cables can certainly start to slow down if they're not lubricated. And how I like to do that is it helps to let gravity help you out by inverting the bike somehow if you can. But dripping some lube down here into the end and then shifting so the cable goes back in will actually make a huge difference once that starts to work its way up. And you can also do it back here with where the cable meets up with the housing. Dripping that into that stuff can actually go a long way to get those rusty cables and shifters working again. That can make a world of difference, just dripping a little bit of lube into the ends of the housing when they're rusty. You can also get spray lubes. There's a company called Triflow. This is if you really get into it and you find that your shifter is almost dead. You can take some spray lube and spray it into the shifter if you can find the opening. Usually it's right around the thumb shifter area there. You can spray some of that in there and try to get it some exercise and get it working again as well. But lubing the cables and lubing the chain it would be the first thing I would do in those cases.
I think that's all for our question and answer. If you have additional questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. I don't know if they can hear me, if you could repeat what I'm saying, because I don't have a mic.
Ah, right. Well, if you guys have any more questions, feel free to leave them in the chat and we'll get them to you as soon as we can. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys got something out of it. My name is Addison. I'm the service manager, and feel free to stop by and say hi anytime. Thank you.